Janna's going to start. Are the mics working okay around the room? Do we have to do anything?
So Greg and I were emailing about how to do this tonight and came from slightly different places thinking about it. And the place that I came from thinking about it was, holy cow, in one more year, my father will have been born a century ago. And so that the very parent in the way that time happens that you once wanted to get out from under, you are now doing your best to re-evoke in that ultimate irony of existence. And so the past seemed quite past to me as I thought about returning tonight. And so I thought that I checked with Greg and thought that the way I would like to start is by framing for you just a little bit about the two men and how they met, and a little bit about that past, because they knew each other across a fair amount of time. In the summer of, reading, I guess is what I was going to say. In the summer of 1952, the year I was born, my father left Oregon, where he was teaching, and visited New York City for several weeks. He went there in part to look in on his father and brother, who were going through difficult times. But he was also there to celebrate the upcoming publication of his first novel, The Natural. It was an event he had dreamed of since he was a boy of 15, and he had worked for almost 25 years to make it happen. Talk about long apprenticeships, by the way, the writing apprenticeship. You know, this was a man who worked for 20 years before he published anything. I think we sort of forget how long that can be. But during this visit to New York City, he met Saul Bellow. He wrote about the visit in a letter to my mother. Saul Bellow is a really wonderful, really superior person. We chatted for 2 hours, including time spent in his car as he drove me from Queens, where he lives, to Manhattan. He said so many nice things about my book and stories that I was infinitely elated. These two ambitious, competitive men maintained a friendship for 35 years. They were not terribly close, but they did not always meet regularly, but they managed to stay in touch. And toward the end of my father's life, when Saul summered in Vermont, not far from where my parents lived in the summers, they saw each other several times a year. I was grown and away by then, and have only a vague memory of one dinner in a restaurant near Wilmington. My father was born in 1914, Bellow in 1915. Saul lived almost 20 years longer than my father. They shared a status of Jewish sons of recent Russian immigrants. They also shared a history of early loss. My father's mother died when he was 15. Saul's died when he was 17. Both men were curious and vital and devoted to fiction writing. They both believed that little in life was as important as books. Greg writes in his memoir, "The tenets of our family included a deep appreciation for art and culture, outright contempt of ostentation, a complete lack of religious observance, sympathy with people who had been disadvantaged or suffered discrimination, support of organized labor, respect for people of all races, and a commitment to fairness embodied in the socialist ideal of each according to their needs." He describes my family's values exactly. I say all this by way of pointing out that Greg and my conversation tonight continues one that began between our families 60 years ago, and that began between us several years ago as Greg was contemplating writing this memoir. And as we discovered that we were both psychotherapists and both trying to understand the balance between our conflicts and hunger for privacy and to be known on our own terms, and our wish to offer our own perspective and our own views about our family lives.
Well, before I start, I have one and only one Bernard Malamud story. I was in New York. I was about 20, and I was reading The Assistant. And I don't remember what day of the week it was, but I had a date. And so I stayed with my cousin, who was a woman who was very interested in literature and had been a very big influence on me. And I said, "I've been reading this great book, but I got to go out." So I came home at 3 or 4 in the morning, and I finished the book. I got up the next morning, and she says, "I read it from cover to cover while you were out." That's how captivating that book was. Let me speak a little bit to why Janna and I decided to do this. I want to talk a little bit about what we experience as the similarities between our fathers and our own experience as children of authors, just to get us started, to frame a little bit about what we want to talk about. So I'm just simply going to list some of the similarities and how they played themselves out between the two of us. As number one, the influence of growing up in a writer's home and in a writer's world. As children, we learned to protect our fathers from intrusion, never to interrupt while they wrote, and early on to understand the need for privacy and solitude, privacy and solitude into which they retreated during their writing day. The second similarity, having to do mostly with our childhood, is Bernard and Saul used stories and allegory as a way to communicate meanings to both of us, each of us, I mean. Two, switching to the similarities and how they played themselves out during our adulthood. Both of our fathers maintained that there was a taboo against making the connection between the writing and the living. Janna and I were brought up on that taboo, subscribed to it well into our adulthood, and overcame it with trepidation. The third similarity, a shared passion for writing. Bernard and Saul led lives devoted to writing well. I use the term a singularity of literary purpose to describe Saul's passion for writing, and Janna calls what I believe to be the same phenomenon, Bernard's ruthlessness for good writing. Number four, our reaction to their literary fame. Janna and I were both uncomfortable as we witnessed the public inflation that accompanied our father's growing fame. That discomfort reached its pinnacle after their death and contributed to our impulse to write memoirs. Similarity number five. Janna and I saw our adult reaction to reading our father's fiction. Janna and I saw crucial aspects of our father's life and emotions transmuted into their fiction, setting up a discontinuity between our experience as readers and a shared dilemma as to how we were to approach these discontinuities, both as children and as memoirists. I see my father most clearly in the voices of his narrators. Reading his novels in chronological sequence after he passed away, helped me to see connections between life events through which I lived and my father's viewpoint on them. The differences are as follows. Saul talked about his past all the time. According to Janna, Bernard did not. The second difference, grappling with the life-work taboo. Janna's impulse to protect her father is described in her first book, Private Matters, subtitled In Defense of a Personal Life, which was published in 1997. By 2006, she had overcome her reticence about memoir and published a memoir called My Father is a Book. After reading both and deeply ambivalent about whether to write about my father, I went to Boston to ask Janna why she had changed her mind. Our 4-hour conversation made me begin to reconsider my protective behavior towards Saul, with something that could not have happened while he was alive. Absolutely not. Let me describe the dilemma in which I found myself. On one hand, I had been protecting Saul out of a habit and out of loyalty to the family taboo. On the other, I was deeply distressed about the nature of the posthumous tributes to my father. I barely recognized the man who was being lauded and came to realize that the tributes were to the public man, the famous author, rather than the father who raised me. I came to believe that I had a duty of truth to him, to my mother, and to myself, and I needed to give an honest portrayal of my father's entire life, warts and all, which balanced the late life fame of the Nobel Prize winner with the questioning, irreverent man who raised me. The third difference, choosing how to write about fiction we know to be very personal, knowing well that we will be not only exposing not only our fathers, but ourselves. My approach has been to read between the lines of my father's fiction, wherein, at moments, I find a candor not present in what Saul said out loud to me, or as best as I am able to determine, to anybody else. I will read a passage from my book about Seize the Day, which was written right after my grandfather passed away, to illustrate. And then after that, I will